Kalamazoo, Michigan, February 12, 2001. A young nursing student, Emily Carter, stepped into the snow-covered expanse of her own backyard at 9:45 p.m. She was just a few feet from her front door, a simple cup of borrowed sugar in her hand. And then, in the unforgiving grip of a winter night, she simply vanished. Her sudden disappearance, a chilling void left in the heart of a close-knit community, ignited a search that defied logic, only to be met by an impenetrable silence. The snow, a pristine canvas, erased every trace, turning a routine evening into an enduring nightmare that would haunt a family and a town for generations. Before we delve into this captivating and heartbreaking case, tell us in the comments below, from which part of the world are you joining us today? Tonight on After the Silence, we unravel the perplexing disappearance of Emily Carter. The brutal grip of winter held Kalamazoo, Michigan, captive in the early days of 2001. A thick, unyielding blanket of snow covered every surface, muffling the usual hum of suburban life into a profound, almost eerie silence. Trees, stripped bare of their leaves, stood like skeletal sentinels against a sky that perpetually threatened more snowfall. The air itself was a biting, dry cold that seeped into bones, making every breath a small, sharp effort. On the evening of Monday, February 12th, the wind, sharp as a razor, whipped through the quiet residential streets, swirling fresh powder into drifts against porch steps and car tires. It was a night that promised isolation, a perfect stage for the ordinary to unravel into the utterly inexplicable. In this stark landscape, a moment of routine neighborly exchange would become etched into the memory of a community as the last verifiable sight of Emily Carter. At precisely 9:45 p.m., Elena Vance, a spry 68-year-old widow who had lived in her modest two-story home on Elm Street for over 40 years, was preparing for bed. From her kitchen window, which overlooked her meticulously kept, though currently snow-covered, backyard, she saw the distinct figure of Emily. Emily, a bright and diligent 22-year-old nursing student, lived just 2 houses down. Earlier that evening, Emily had appeared at Mrs. Vance's back door, a friendly, familiar presence asking to borrow a cup of sugar. She had mentioned a sudden impulse to bake cookies, a small, endearing detail that now seemed tragically out of place. Mrs. Vance, accustomed to Emily's occasional visits for advice or a quick chat, had happily obliged, handing over a chipped ceramic measuring cup filled to the brim with white granulated sugar. Emily, wrapped in her vibrant red winter coat, a flash of defiant color against the monochrome landscape, had thanked her warmly, her breath misting in the cold air. Mrs. Vance remembered the easy smile on Emily's face, the simple joy of a young woman absorbed in a trivial late-night task. As Emily turned to leave, the borrowed cup held carefully in one gloved hand, she had waved goodbye, disappearing momentarily around the side of Mrs. Vance's garage. Now, through the frosted pane, Mrs. Vance watched Emily's bright red coat reappear, a solitary beacon moving across the pristine white of her own backyard. Emily was heading directly towards her back door, which was only a few yards away. Mrs. Vance watched until the red coat disappeared behind the large, snow-laden evergreen that stood near the Carter family's back entrance, a silent, natural curtain falling on the last known image of Emily Carter. The normalcy of the moment, the fleeting image of a young woman returning home with a borrowed cup of sugar, would soon be shattered, replaced by an abyss of questions. Linda Carter, Emily's mother, was a registered nurse at Bronson Methodist Hospital, a profession she shared with her daughter's aspirations. Her shifts often extended late into the evening, and on February 12th, she didn't pull her Ford Taurus into the driveway of their Elm Street home until just past 10:30 p.m. The familiar crunch of her tires on the packed snow was the only sound in the otherwise quiet cul-de-sac. Entering the house, Linda instinctively called out, "Emily? I'm home." The only response was the creak of the old house settling and the low hum of the refrigerator. A quick glance into Emily's bedroom revealed an unmade bed, a stack of nursing textbooks open on her desk, and a half-eaten bowl of cereal on her nightstand, all hallmarks of a busy student's life. But Emily herself was nowhere to be seen. Linda's initial reaction was one of mild annoyance rather than concern. Emily, like many young adults, sometimes visited friends or her boyfriend, Mark Ellison, without leaving an explicit note. Linda assumed she had simply gone out and forgotten to inform her, a common oversight. As the minutes stretched into hours, however, A subtle unease began to gnaw at Linda. Midnight passed without Emily's return. Linda tried Emily's cell phone, listening to the recorded greeting for a second before the automated voice redirected her to voicemail. She then tried Mark Ellison's number, but that call also went straight to voicemail. The silence in the house, initially unremarkable, now felt heavy, charged with an unsettling emptiness. Linda paced the living room, her eyes darting repeatedly to the front window, hoping to catch the familiar headlights of a car pulling up to the curb, or the sight of Emily's silhouette approaching the porch. By 2 a.m., the unease had curdled into a cold, knotting panic. Emily was not a spontaneous, reckless young woman. She was responsible, meticulous in her studies, and always mindful of her mother's worries. This protracted absence was deeply out of character. The clock's steady ticking amplified Linda's growing terror, each second stretching into an unbearable eternity. The house, usually a sanctuary of shared life, had become a desolate monument to her daughter's inexplicable absence. Shortly after 3 a.m., her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and desperation, Linda Carter placed the call to the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Tom Reynolds, then 52, a seasoned law enforcement officer with over 2 decades of experience, took the call. He understood the critical nature of the initial hours in any missing person case, a window of time often referred to as the golden hours. Given the harsh winter conditions, the urgency was amplified. A young woman seemingly vanished into thin air just steps from her home. By dawn, the tranquil residential street was transformed. Patrol cars lined the curb, their flashing blue and red lights painting stark, pulsing streaks across the pristine snow. Uniformed deputies, alongside a contingent of concerned community volunteers, began to systematically fan out across the immediate neighborhood, their boots crunching loudly in the pre-dawn stillness. K-9 units were deployed, their handlers guiding the German shepherds through the deep drifts, hoping the dog's keen sense of smell could pick up any trace of Emily's scent. The search, however, was immediately and severely hampered by the very element that defined the Kalamazoo winter: snow. The relentless snowfall that had continued for several hours after Emily's disappearance had blanketed the entire area, meticulously erasing any potential footprints, tire tracks, or disturbances in the landscape. The pristine white expanse, while visually striking, was an investigator's nightmare. For the K-9 units, the constantly falling and drifting snow made it nearly impossible to isolate a scent trail. The extreme cold further complicated matters, potentially degrading any fragile evidence. Every pathway, every backyard, every patch of dormant woods bordering the neighborhood was meticulously combed, yet yielded nothing but fresh snow and the biting, relentless wind. The Carters' home, a symbol of warmth and family just hours before, now stood as a grim, silent monument to an absence that felt both absolute and profoundly unsettling. The initial ground searches, despite the dedicated efforts of dozens of individuals, proved frustratingly ineffective, swallowed by the vast, featureless white. As the first hours of frantic searching yielded no immediate breakthrough, investigators began the methodical process of interviewing anyone who might have seen Emily or possessed any information regarding her movements that night. Naturally, attention quickly focused on Emily's boyfriend, Mark Ellison. Mark, then 24 years old, was a familiar if somewhat contentious figure in Emily's life. Their relationship was well known among their friends and neighbors as being particularly volatile, often characterized by intense public arguments. Mark was described by multiple sources as possessing a possessive nature and a streak of profound jealousy that frequently manifested in controlling behavior and heated confrontations. Sheriff Reynolds personally conducted Mark's initial interrogation at the local precinct. The room was sparsely furnished, a metal table and 2 chairs under the stark glow of fluorescent lights. Mark sat across from the sheriff, his hands clasped tightly on the table. He asserted that he had been home the entire evening of February 12th, watching television with his older brother, Richard Ellison, who was 27. Richard subsequently corroborated Mark's alibi, stating they had spent the evening together, a common occurrence for the 2 brothers who lived together. However, investigators noted a distinct lack of genuine distress in Mark's demeanor. His answers to Sheriff Reynolds' questions were precise, almost unnaturally so, as if he had rehearsed them. His outward cooperation felt stiff, lacking the spontaneous, unbridled emotion one might expect from a boyfriend whose partner had just vanished without a trace. This detached composure, combined with the reports from neighbors, painted a troubling picture. Several neighbors had recounted instances of loud arguments between Emily and Mark, some occurring openly on the street or in their driveways, often fueled by Mark's perceived jealousy over Emily's interactions with male classmates or friends. One neighbor recalled seeing Mark's car screeching away from Emily's house after a particularly heated exchange just weeks prior. While his alibi was seemingly confirmed by his brother, the underlying tensions in his relationship with Emily, coupled with his unnerving demeanor, positioned him as a significant person of interest. As the investigation continued, another name began to surface through hushed whispers within the Kalamazoo community, eventually reaching the ears of the sheriff's department. Raymond Doyle. Doyle, a solitary figure of 45, lived a few blocks from the Carter family, his house a slightly unkempt outlier amidst the tidy suburban landscape. He was known primarily for his reclusive lifestyle, rarely interacting with neighbors beyond a perfunctory nod. His routine seemed to revolve around infrequent trips to local bars where he would sit alone, and long periods of seclusion in his home. His reputation was further colored by a minor but unsettling criminal record. Several years prior, he had been detained for public indecency after an incident at a local park where he was found exposing himself. While not a violent crime, it contributed significantly to his local notoriety as the neighborhood oddball, a peculiar and unsettling presence. Neighbors described him as generally harmless, but undeniably strange, a man who kept to himself, often seen staring out his windows or tinkering with his old beat-up pickup truck at odd hours. Without any concrete evidence directly linking him to Emily's disappearance at this initial stage, Doyle remained merely a name, a shadow of suspicion cast by community speculation and his own unusual past, someone strange enough not to be involved. As days bled into weeks, the initial flurry of investigative activity began to wane. The deep snow continued to obscure any potential clues, creating an almost perfect canvas for a disappearance without a trace. Despite exhaustive efforts, meticulous grid searches, repeated door-to-door inquiries, and public appeals for information broadcast on local news channels, no further trace of Emily Carter was found. The meticulous police work, the tireless dedication of volunteers, all met with the same impenetrable, chilling silence. The case of Emily Carter remained open, but without substantial leads, without a body, and with only two individuals bearing the nascent weight of suspicion, it quickly threatened to join the ranks of countless other cases lost to the chilling embrace of the unknown. The brutal winter of 2001 had not only stolen a young woman from her family, but had also sealed her fate within layers of icy mystery, leaving behind only questions and an unbearable void. The initial frantic searches for Emily Carter, swallowed by the relentless snowfall, soon transitioned into a more methodical, yet equally desperate investigative effort led by Sheriff Tom Reynolds. The Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Department was a relatively small force, accustomed more to minor property crimes and domestic disputes than to the bewildering disappearance of a young woman from her own neighborhood. Reynolds, a seasoned veteran, understood the profound gravity of the situation and the immense pressure bearing down on his team. Every deputy, every available resource was redirected to the Emily Carter case. The routine of daily police work was suspended, replaced by a singular, consuming focus. Detectives revisited every home on Elm Street and the surrounding blocks, not just once, but multiple times. They canvassed the wider community, showing Emily's photograph to shop owners, gas station attendants, and delivery drivers, asking if anyone anywhere had seen her after 9:45 p.m. on February 12th. Each conversation began with a sliver of hope, only to end in the same frustrating dead end. The collective memory of Kalamazoo seemed to have a blind spot for Emily after she left Mrs. Vance's sight. Flyers bearing Emily's bright, smiling face were posted on every lamppost, in every storefront window, slowly weathering in the persistent cold. The absence of any definitive eyewitness, coupled with the snow's effective erasure of physical trails, created an immediate and formidable barrier to the investigation. Central to the early stages of the inquiry was the continued scrutiny of Emily's boyfriend, Mark Ellison. Sheriff Reynolds had been a keen observer during Mark's initial interview, noting the young man's unnervingly composed demeanor. Mark, still 24, maintained his story. He was home with his older brother, Richard. Richard Ellison, 27, echoed this claim, stating they had spent the evening together, watching television and playing video games. However, as the days turned into weeks, the seemingly solid alibi began to show cracks under repeated questioning. Reynolds's detectives pressed Mark on specifics. What shows were they watching? What games? Mark's answers remained consistent, almost perfectly so, but the lack of spontaneous detail, the absence of any natural recall that might betray a moment of true, unscripted memory, struck the seasoned investigators as suspicious. It was the careful, almost practiced nature of his responses that raised a red flag, rather than any direct contradiction. "He spoke like he was reading from a script," one detective remarked to Reynolds. "Too perfect." The inherent weakness of a sibling alibi in such a critical case also weighed heavily. Richard's unwavering loyalty to his younger brother was evident. While there was no concrete evidence to suggest Richard was deliberately fabricating his story, his testimony lacked the independent corroboration that would have rendered it truly unassailable. No other witnesses could place both brothers at home throughout the entire evening. The TV listings for that night yielded no unique program Mark could definitively recall that would establish his presence. The alibi, while not disproven, remained inherently questionable. Further deepening the suspicion surrounding Mark were the numerous accounts from neighbors and Emily's friends. Mrs. Henderson, a quiet woman who lived next door to Emily, recounted several instances of loud shouting matches emanating from the Carter residence, particularly during the warmer months when windows were left open. "It was always Emily and Mark," she'd stated to a deputy, her voice hushed. "He had such a temper, especially if he thought she was looking at another boy." Another neighbor, Mr. Davies, who often worked late in his garage, recalled seeing Mark's beat-up sedan speeding away from Emily's house on more than one occasion, the tires squealing in aggressive haste, usually after a visible argument. Emily's close friend and nursing school classmate, Sarah Jenkins, provided a more intimate perspective. Sarah tearfully described how Emily had confided in her about Mark's escalating jealousy. "He hated it when I studied with male classmates," Sarah recounted to Detective Harding. "He'd call constantly, demand to know where I was, who I was with. Emily was getting tired of it. She was thinking about breaking up with him." These collective testimonies painted a disturbing portrait of Mark Ellison, possessive, prone to fits of jealousy, and now with an alibi that felt too rehearsed. He became the primary focus of the initial investigation. Parallel to the scrutiny of Mark Ellison, the figure of Raymond Doyle began to solidify in the periphery of the investigation, propelled by the persistent hum of small-town gossip. Doyle, 45, lived a quiet, almost invisible life on the outskirts of Emily's neighborhood. His house, a ramshackle structure with peeling paint and perpetually drawn blinds, stood in stark contrast to the well-maintained homes around it. In a town like Kalamazoo, where everyone knew everyone, Doyle was an anomaly. He was the perpetual outsider. Rumors about his peculiar habits circulated. He kept to himself, rarely spoke to neighbors, and was often seen taking solitary walks late at night, even in inclement weather. His vehicle, an older model rust-speckled pickup truck, was occasionally spotted cruising slowly down residential streets at odd hours, an observation that seemed benign at the time, but gained an unsettling significance in the wake of Emily's disappearance. His past history, though not violent, certainly contributed to his isolated status. Records indicated a minor arrest for public indecency several years prior, an incident that had spread quickly through the local grapevine. While the offense was not directly linked to violence or abduction, it painted him as someone who existed outside the accepted social norms of Kalamazoo, a silent judgment passed by many. He was seen as the weird one, the kind of person easily targeted by suspicion when a tragedy struck a community. Detectives interviewed Doyle, who denied any knowledge of Emily or her disappearance, offering no alibi beyond his usual reclusive activities. With no direct evidence linking him to Emily, and no clear motive, he remained a person of interest, largely due to his peculiar nature and the collective unease he inspired. For Linda Carter and her husband, the days that followed Emily's disappearance were an agonizing descent into an unbearable limbo. Each morning brought renewed hope, fueled by the rising sun and the determined faces of the search teams. Each night brought only the crushing weight of unanswered questions and the hollow ache of Emily's absence. Linda's once vibrant home now felt like a mausoleum. Emily's toothbrush still stood in its holder. Her unfinished novel lay face down on her bedside table, and her scent, a lingering trace of her favorite perfume, seemed to hover in the air of her empty bedroom. Linda would sit for hours in Emily's room, running her hand over a stack of college notes, or clutching a photograph of her daughter, tears streaming silently down her face. The family rallied, but their grief was a palpable, suffocating presence. Community vigils were held at local churches, candles flickering against the cold night sky, prayers offered for Emily's safe return, or, failing that, for answers. But the only response was the deafening silence of the Michigan winter. Months crawled by, each passing day eroding a little more of the initial frantic energy. Winter reluctantly gave way to the first tentative signs of spring. The snow, which had stubbornly held Kalamazoo in its grip, began its slow retreat, revealing the brown, sodden earth beneath. It was in early April 2001, nearly 2 months after Emily vanished, that the first and only tangible piece of evidence surfaced. A local man, out walking his dog along an infrequently traveled, gravel-shouldered road, roughly 2 kilometers from the Carter home, spotted a flash of color in a roadside ditch. The ditch, a shallow depression bordering a dense thicket of bare trees, had been thoroughly covered by snow during the winter months, making it impossible to search effectively before. As the snow receded, it revealed a familiar, vibrant hue, Emily Carter's distinctive red winter coat. The discovery sent a jolt of renewed hope and urgency through the community and the sheriff's department. This was it. This was the break everyone had been praying for. Sheriff Reynolds immediately dispatched a crime scene unit to the location. The ditch was meticulously taped off, and forensic experts, carefully navigating the still muddy terrain, recovered the coat. It was carefully bagged, preserved as the most critical piece of evidence in the agonizingly stagnant investigation. The location of the discovery, far from Emily's home in a somewhat remote area, immediately suggested foul play. No one believed Emily would have simply discarded her coat there by accident. The red coat was rushed to the Michigan State Police Crime Lab for immediate forensic analysis. Expectations were high. This single item, it was believed, held the key to unlocking the mystery of Emily's disappearance. Analysts meticulously examined every fiber, every stain, every crevice of the garment. The findings confirmed what was already known. The coat bore traces of dirt and residue from melted snow, consistent with having been exposed to the elements. Crucially, it contained several hair fibers, which DNA analysis quickly confirmed belonged to Emily Carter herself. This indicated that she had indeed been wearing the coat when it was discarded or lost. However, the forensic examination also yielded a crushing disappointment. Despite the most exhaustive analysis, no foreign DNA was detected on the coat. There were no identifiable fingerprints belonging to an assailant, no unusual fibers that could be definitively linked to another person, no bloodstains or other clear signs of a violent struggle that could be attributed to an attacker. The dirt on the coat was generic, common to the area, offering no specific clues. The conclusion of the initial forensic report was stark and disheartening, inconclusive regarding the presence of an assailant. The coat, while unequivocally Emily's and found in a suspicious location, provided no concrete answers about what happened to her or who was responsible. It was a tantalizing lead that ultimately led nowhere conclusive. The discovery of the coat, initially a beacon of hope, instead deepened the frustration of both the investigators and the Carter family. With no body, no weapon, and no direct forensic link to any suspect, the investigation slowly, painfully began to cool. The intensive resources dedicated to the case were gradually scaled back. Sheriff Reynolds, burdened by the unsolved mystery, found himself increasingly helpless. The community, once united in its fervent search, slowly retreated into a quiet dread, the knowledge that a perpetrator might still be walking among them. Linda Carter, however, refused to surrender. Even as official efforts dwindled, She continued her own relentless search for answers, a mother's unbreakable vow against the encroaching silence. The red coat, once a symbol of Emily's vibrant life, now lay in an evidence locker, a silent, frustrating testament to a mystery that seemed destined to remain unsolved. The devastating revelation that Emily Carter's red coat, the sole tangible piece of evidence, yielded no conclusive forensic results, had cast a pall over the entire investigation. Hope, which had flared so brightly with its discovery, was extinguished, replaced by a profound and chilling despair. The initial flurry of police activity gradually subsided, the relentless Michigan winter having effectively erased any immediate trails. The file on Emily Carter's disappearance, once prioritized, was eventually relegated to the cold case archives of the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Department. It was a bureaucratic acknowledgement of defeat, a silent testament to the limitations of forensic science in 2001. For Linda Carter, however, the concept of a cold case was an unbearable abstraction. Her daughter's absence was a searing, ever-present wound that deepened with each passing day. The very air in their Elm Street home seemed to hum with Emily's memory, a bittersweet symphony of what was lost. Linda's life, once a familiar rhythm of work and family, became a singular, tireless crusade. The initial shock gave way to a hardened resolve, a mother's fierce, unyielding refusal to surrender her daughter to the anonymity of the missing. She preserved Emily's bedroom as a sacred space, a meticulously maintained museum of a life abruptly paused. Emily's nursing textbooks remained open on her desk, a pencil tucked between pages, as if she might return at any moment to continue her studies. Her favorite coffee mug, emblazoned with a smiling cat, still sat on her bedside table. Linda would often sit there for hours, running her fingers over Emily's possessions, inhaling the faint, lingering scent of her perfume, a desperate attempt to conjure her presence from the suffocating void. The weight of the tragedy fractured the Carter family in subtle, insidious ways. Linda's husband, John, a quiet man by nature, retreated deeper into himself, burying his grief beneath layers of stoicism and long hours at work. Their other children, Emily's younger siblings, struggled to cope, their childhood innocence marred by the pervasive shadow of their sister's disappearance. But Linda, though heartbroken, found a grim strength in her activism. She became a constant, unwavering voice in a community that, while initially supportive, slowly began to retreat into its own routines, the collective memory of the tragedy dulling with time, every year. As February 12th approached, marking the anniversary of Emily's vanishing, Linda would channel her grief into action. She organized candlelight vigils at St. Augustine Cathedral, the flickering flames of dozens of candles illuminating the faces of family, dwindling friends, and a faithful core of sympathetic community members. Against the biting Michigan cold, Linda would speak, her voice often trembling with emotion but always infused with an unshakable resolve. "Emily is not forgotten," she would declare, her words echoing through the hushed nave. "Her case is not closed. We will not rest until we have answers." These vigils, often covered by local news, served as a crucial reminder to Kalamazoo that Emily Carter's story was not over, that a mother's love defied the passage of time. Linda's advocacy extended beyond annual ceremonies. She maintained regular contact with Sheriff Reynolds, even as his updates grew increasingly sparse and devoid of new information. "Anything new, Tom?" "Any lead?" she would ask, her eyes searching his for any flicker of hope. Reynolds, a man deeply affected by the unsolved case that had defined a period of his tenure, could only offer his sincere regret and the assurance that the file, though cold, remained open. New avenues of investigation, he had to admit, simply did not exist with the forensic technology available in the early 2000s. Linda also established a grassroots campaign, creating flyers that featured Emily's bright, smiling face, distributing them not just locally but to neighboring counties. Clinging to the desperate hope that someone somewhere had seen something, she launched a website, Justice for Emily, a meticulously curated digital archive of the case documenting every known detail, every news clipping, every appeal for information. It was a perpetual call to action, a digital monument to her lost daughter. The years brought no answers, only a deepening sense of frustration and the gnawing ache of uncertainty, but they never, not once, extinguished Linda's unwavering hope. Her persistence became a quiet, powerful force, a testament to a mother's unbreakable vow against the encroaching silence. Meanwhile, the two primary persons of interest identified during the initial investigation navigated the aftermath of Emily's disappearance in starkly contrasting ways. Mark Ellison, Emily's volatile 24-year-old boyfriend, found himself increasingly isolated. The persistent rumors of his suffocating jealousy and the nagging suspicions surrounding his almost perfectly rehearsed alibi made him a pariah in Kalamazoo. Friends of Emily, who had once tolerated his presence, now openly shunned him. The whispers followed him everywhere, in grocery stores, at local hangouts, even at his workplace. The weight of this collective suspicion, even without concrete evidence or charges, proved too immense for him to bear within the confines of the small town. Within a few years of Emily's vanishing, Mark Ellison quietly married a woman he had met through an online forum, a woman from outside of Michigan. He then left Kalamazoo permanently, severing all ties with his past in the state. His departure was a quiet exodus, almost unnoticed by most. But for those who remembered Emily and the lingering questions surrounding Mark, it felt like an abdication, a silent admission of guilt. He effectively vanished from the public consciousness of Kalamazoo, becoming a mere footnote in Emily's unsolved narrative. Raymond Doyle, on the other hand, remained. The solitary 45-year-old neighbor, whose peculiar habits and minor criminal history had made him a peripheral but persistent person of interest, continued to inhabit his ramshackle house on the fringes of the Carter's neighborhood. His home, with its peeling paint and perpetually drawn blinds, was a stark anomaly amidst the otherwise meticulously maintained suburban landscape. In a town where social connections were paramount, Doyle remained an enigma, the quintessential outsider. His life continued much as it had before Emily's disappearance, reclusive, devoid of any obvious connections to the community beyond his infrequent trips for supplies. He was still occasionally seen driving his older model, rust-speckled pickup truck, sometimes cruising slowly down residential streets at odd hours, an observation that had seemed benign at the time, but gained an unsettling significance in the collective memory of the town. His past history, though non-violent, undeniably contributed to his isolated status. The record of his arrest for public indecency several years prior, an incident that had spread like wildfire through the local grapevine, solidified his reputation. While the offense bore no direct link to violence or abduction, it firmly cemented his image as someone who operated outside the accepted social norms of Kalamazoo, a silent judgment passed by many. He was the weird one, an easy target for suspicion when tragedy struck. Detectives had interviewed Doyle early in the investigation. He had denied any knowledge of Emily or her disappearance, offering no alibi beyond his usual reclusive activities. He claimed he had spent the evening alone at home, as he usually did. With no direct evidence linking him to Emily, and no clear motive established beyond speculation, he remained a person of interest, largely due to his peculiar nature and the collective unease he inspired. For many residents, his continued silent presence in Kalamazoo was a subtle, unsettling reminder of the unsolved mystery, a silent question mark hanging over Elm Street. Parents subtly warned their children to avoid his house, a quiet acknowledgement of the town's lingering discomfort. His quiet demeanor, once merely unusual, now carried a faint but persistent chill, an unspoken assumption of dark secrets. Raymond Doyle was never publicly accused, never officially charged, yet the shadow of doubt never truly lifted from him in the minds of some Kalamazoo residents. Nearly 2 decades elapsed. The turn of the millennium had long since passed, and the world had undergone seismic shifts in technology, communication, and forensic science. In the climate-controlled archives of the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Department, dusty case files of unsolved crimes sat in forgotten steel cabinets, silent witnesses to cold trails and unanswered prayers. Among them was the file of Emily Carter, a thick, meticulously compiled collection of reports, witness statements, and forensic analyses that had long since reached an impasse. It was categorized as cold, a bureaucratic euphemism that implied hopeless, a case waiting for a miracle. That year, 2019, brought a fresh perspective to the department. Detective Karen Mitchell, a sharp, driven investigator with 17 years on the force, was assigned to spearhead the newly established cold case unit. At 39 years old, Mitchell represented a new generation of law enforcement. She was keenly aware of how rapidly advancements in forensic technology were breathing new life into seemingly dead investigations across the country. She possessed an analytical mind, a relentless work ethic, and a fierce determination to seek justice, particularly for victims whose cases had languished in obscurity for years. Mitchell began her tenure with a systematic, almost archaeological review of the department's cold cases, seeking any and all opportunities for re-examination. The Emily Carter file quickly caught her discerning eye. The sheer tragedy of a young woman vanishing without a trace, the complete absence of a body, and the tantalizing but ultimately inconclusive discovery of her vibrant red coat deeply intrigued her. Mitchell spent weeks immersed in the details, poring over every document, every police report, every interview transcript. She noted the detailed accounts of Mark Ellison's volatile relationship with Emily and the unnerving consistency of his rehearsed alibi. She also absorbed the community's lingering suspicion of Raymond Doyle, noting how often his name appeared in neighborhood gossip. But what truly resonated with her, what presented a potential new avenue, was the initial forensic report on the red coat. It explicitly stated inconclusive regarding foreign DNA, a term that in 2001 meant not found with available technology. Mitchell understood that available technology was the operative phrase. Mitchell was particularly knowledgeable about a revolutionary new forensic technique that had emerged and gained widespread acceptance in recent years: DNA touch analysis. This cutting-edge method was capable of identifying genetic profiles from minute epidermal cells, skin cells, left behind through even the most casual contact. It could extract viable DNA from trace amounts of perspiration, friction, or even a fleeting touch against fabric, requiring far less biological material than the conventional DNA testing methods available in 2001. It was, quite simply, a game-changer for cold cases, offering the potential to uncover genetic material that older methods would have entirely missed. Mitchell recognized the immense potential this advanced technology held for Emily's case. The red coat, the only physical piece of evidence directly linked to Emily at the time of her disappearance, had been meticulously preserved in the state forensic storage facility. For nearly 2 decades it had lain dormant, a silent crimson sentinel in a climate-controlled locker, awaiting a future where science could finally unlock its secrets. Its discovery in that lonely ditch had been a turning point then, offering a fleeting glimmer of hope, and now Mitchell believed it could be again. In late 2019, with a renewed sense of purpose, Detective Mitchell submitted a formal request to the Michigan State Police Crime Lab. The request was clear and concise: re-examine Emily Carter's red winter coat using the most advanced DNA touch technology available. The request was approved. The coat, which had been meticulously catalogued, photographed and sealed in an archival evidence bag since its recovery in April 2001, was carefully retrieved from its long slumber in the forensic storage facility. It was a tangible link to a young life abruptly stolen, a faded piece of fabric that carried the silent weight of 2 decades of unanswered prayers and agonizing uncertainty. As the evidence technician meticulously unsealed the bag, the vibrant red of the coat, though slightly dulled by time and its exposure to the elements, seemed to flash with a renewed, almost defiant intensity. It was no longer just a coat. It was a potential key, a dormant promise of truth. This was a new chance, not just for the grieving Carter family, but for the entire community of Kalamazoo, to finally unravel the mystery that had cast such a long, cold shadow over their lives. The hope after so many years of silence was fragile, but undeniably present. The silent object, after years of lying dormant, was finally about to speak its secrets. The re-examination of Emily Carter's red winter coat, initiated by Detective Karen Mitchell in late 2019, had set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately shatter nearly 2 decades of silence. For years, the coat had been a spectral presence in the Michigan State Police Crime Lab, a symbol of both hope and the limitations of past technology. Now, under the meticulous gaze of advanced DNA touch analysis, its silent testimony was finally ready to be heard. The forensic process was exhaustive, a painstaking endeavor that underscored the vast advancements in genetic science since 2001. Specialized equipment, capable of detecting even microscopic traces, was employed to meticulously scan the coat's every fiber. The focus was on areas of high contact, the inside of the collar, where a person's neck and jawline would rub, the inner lining of the sleeves, indicating a grip or struggle, and the broader internal fabric, where epidermal cells might have been shed through prolonged contact. Scientists, trained in the delicate art of touch DNA extraction, worked with surgical precision, treating each thread and seam as a potential repository of crucial, invisible information. This was about far more than blood or semen. It was about the subtle, almost imperceptible cellular residue left behind by human interaction, even a fleeting brush. The work spanned months, each sample carefully processed, amplified and analyzed, slowly piecing together a genetic puzzle from fragments invisible to the naked eye. Then, in early 2020, the Michigan State Laboratory delivered its report. The findings were not merely significant, they were a bombshell. Forensic specialists confirmed the unambiguous presence of viable male epithelial cells on the inner lining of Emily's red coat. The cells were particularly concentrated in two critical zones: the area around the collar, suggesting a direct hold or forceful contact with the neck, arch, upper chest region, and along the inner sleeve, consistent with someone gripping Emily's arms. This was the irrefutable evidence Detective Mitchell had risked her professional capital on. The original 2001 analysis, limited by the technology of its time, had reported no foreign DNA. Now, a clear and distinct male genetic profile had been extracted. A ghost from the past finally given a name. The next, agonizingly crucial step was to identify the source of this DNA. The newly isolated genetic profile was immediately uploaded to the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, the national database containing DNA profiles from convicted offenders, unsolved crime scene evidence, and missing persons. The waiting period, though only a matter of weeks, felt like an eternity for Mitchell and her team, each day fraught with a potent mix of anticipation and dread. When the CODIS hit finally arrived, it was definitive and shocking. The male DNA profile belonged to Raymond Doyle. The system had found a match. Raymond Doyle, the reclusive neighbor whose peculiar habits and minor criminal history had made him a peripheral, almost dismissed, person of interest nearly 2 decades prior, was now directly and forensically linked to Emily Carter's coat. His DNA had been entered into the national database in 2009, not for a violent felony, but following an arrest for misdemeanor assault during a bar altercation. This seemingly insignificant event, a drunken brawl resulting in a simple fingerprint and DNA swab, had inadvertently provided the missing piece to a 2-decade-old murder mystery. The coincidence, Detective Mitchell noted with a grim satisfaction, was not coincidence at all. It was fate, guided by the relentless march of scientific progress. The silence that had enveloped Emily Carter's disappearance for so long had finally been broken by the undeniable voice of science. With the DNA evidence in hand, Detective Mitchell and her newly invigorated team immediately shifted their focus. The old case files, once gathering dust in a forgotten corner, were now the hottest priority in the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Department. Every single statement, every police report, every interview transcript related to Raymond Doyle was meticulously pulled, digitally scanned, and re-examined with a fresh, critical eye. Mitchell began by scrutinizing Doyle's original interview from 2001. In it, Doyle had unequivocally denied any knowledge of Emily Carter, claiming he had been at home alone the entire evening of February 12, 2001, just as he did most nights. He had stated with a flat affect that he had not left his house, nor had he seen Emily or her distinctive red coat. This blanket denial, once difficult to challenge without contradictory evidence, now stood in stark, glaring contradiction to the irrefutable DNA found on Emily's coat. The inconsistencies in his original statements, previously dismissed as the ramblings of an odd recluse, now screamed with a chilling implication of deception. Mitchell's team then launched a discreet yet intensive re-interview campaign, focusing on the vicinity of Elm Street and anyone who might have observed Raymond Doyle's activities around the time of Emily's disappearance. They revisited neighbors, showing them updated photographs of both Emily and a younger Raymond Doyle, gently prodding their memories, emphasizing that even seemingly insignificant details from 2 decades ago might now be crucial. The passage of 20 years had admittedly blurred some recollections, but for others, the trauma of Emily's vanishing had kept the events of that winter night remarkably vivid, particularly those details that had always felt off. Several neighbors, upon seeing Doyle's photograph again, recalled specific, unsettling observations about his older, rust-speckled pickup truck on the night of Emily's disappearance. Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins, who lived 3 houses down from the Carters and had known Doyle to be a creature of habit, recalled seeing his distinctive truck with its dented rear fender and telltale exhaust plume, driving unusually slowly down Elm Street around 9 p.m. on February 12th. "I thought it was strange," she recounted to Mitchell, her voice filled with a tremor of belated realization. "He usually kept to himself, never really drove around the neighborhood like that unless he was leaving for the bar. But he was just driving up and down, real slow. Like he was looking for something or someone." Another witness, now a middle-aged professional, but then a high school student walking home from a friend's house, remembered seeing Doyle's truck parked briefly on a dimly lit side street intersecting Elm Street. Near Emily's home around 9:30 p.m., the engine was running, but the interior was dark, obscured by the heavy snow in the late hour. These fresh, corroborated accounts directly contradicted Doyle's original vehement assertion that he had not left his house that evening, painting an increasingly sinister and meticulously planned picture. The investigation extended beyond the immediate neighborhood, seeking to reconstruct Doyle's activities and demeanor in the days following Emily's disappearance. Mitchell's team tracked down former colleagues of Raymond Doyle from the small manufacturing plant where he had worked in 2001. These interviews proved particularly illuminating, revealing details that at the time seemed merely odd, but now took on a chilling significance. Several colleagues remembered Doyle's behavior in the days and weeks immediately following Emily's disappearance as distinctly out of character. He had been noticeably absent from work, calling in sick more frequently than his usual consistent attendance. One former co-worker, Frank Miller, a gruff but observant man, recalled Doyle returning to work after several days off with what appeared to be fresh scratches on his forearms and hands. They looked like thorn scratches, or maybe from a struggle like he'd been dragged through a bush, Miller told detectives, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "I asked him what happened, and he just shrugged them off, said he'd been doing some yard work. But it was dead of February. Everything was frozen solid. Didn't make sense then, but it does now." Another former colleague, Gary Thomas, remembered a particularly disturbing and chilling comment Doyle had made in the break room about a week after Emily vanished. As news of Emily's disappearance dominated local headlines and discussions, the subject naturally came up during a lunch break. Doyle, usually quiet and aloof, had uncharacteristically interjected, his voice unusually low and devoid of emotion. "It's easy for someone to disappear in the snow without leaving a trace," when the comment, chillingly prescient and morbid in hindsight, had stuck with Thomas, a casual remark that now echoed with profound, sinister meaning. The accumulated evidence was nothing short of overwhelming. A direct, irrefutable DNA link to Emily's coat, multiple eyewitness accounts placing Doyle's truck in the immediate vicinity of Emily's home at the precise time of her disappearance, and corroborating testimony from former colleagues detailing suspicious injuries and a chilling, self-incriminating comment. The intricate puzzle pieces, scattered and seemingly disparate for 2 decades, were finally locking into place, forming a cohesive and damning narrative. Following months of intense covert surveillance, during which Detective Mitchell's team meticulously documented Raymond Doyle's daily routines, his movements, and his characteristic lack of meaningful interactions, the decision was made to finally act. The target was Raymond Doyle, now 65 years old, a man whose graying hair, stooped posture, and weathered face belied the dark, unspeakable secret he had carried for so long, hidden in plain sight. On a crisp August morning in 2021, the quiet suburban street where Doyle lived was abruptly transformed. A convoy of unmarked police vehicles, their sirens silent but their presence undeniable, converged on Doyle's ramshackle house. The usual morning calm was shattered by the sudden appearance of law enforcement. Detective Mitchell, commanding the operation, ensured every tactical precaution was taken to secure the scene and ensure the safe apprehension of the suspect. In a profound gesture of respect for the original investigation and the enduring impact of the case on those who first worked it, she extended a special invitation to now-retired Sheriff Tom Reynolds, who was 72 at the time. Reynolds, a man who had carried the heavy burden of Emily's unsolved disappearance for 2 decades, arrived on the scene. He stood silently, a stoic observer, his face a mixture of grim satisfaction and profound sadness, witnessing the culmination of a case he once thought would haunt him to his grave. His presence was a stark, poignant reminder of the relentless march of time and the enduring human cost of such crimes. As officers moved swiftly to secure the perimeter, Raymond Doyle, alerted by the commotion, emerged from his front door. He was a frail, bewildered figure, his eyes wide with surprise and a flicker of something unreadable. Perhaps fear, perhaps a grim resignation, crossed his face. He was apprehended without incident, quietly placed in handcuffs, his hands behind his back. The sight of the oddball neighbor, a man who had been a quiet, almost invisible fixture in the community, being led away in handcuffs, formally accused of first-degree murder, sent shockwaves through the quiet community of Kalamazoo. It was a moment of profound, unsettling revelation, a brutal unveiling of a hidden truth that had festered beneath the surface for 2 decades. For Linda Carter, receiving the call from Detective Mitchell confirming Doyle's arrest, it was the culmination of 20 years of relentless, agonizing waiting. Justice, though tragically delayed, had finally begun its slow, deliberate march. The long, oppressive silence surrounding Emily Carter's fate had finally been broken, replaced by the clang of handcuffs and the chilling echo of a name that now carried the weight of a horrific secret. The arrest of Raymond Doyle in August 2021 reverberated through Kalamazoo, shattering the long-held assumption that Emily Carter's disappearance was destined to remain an unsolvable mystery. For Detective Karen Mitchell and the entire Sheriff's Department, it was the culmination of years of tireless work and the vindication of an unwavering belief that justice for Emily was still possible. With Doyle in custody, the focus intensified on obtaining a confession and, failing that, constructing an irrefutable legal case based on the overwhelming scientific and circumstantial evidence. During the subsequent interrogations at the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Department, Raymond Doyle, now 65, presented a facade of calm and persistent denial. Under the harsh, unblinking glare of the interview room lights, his demeanor remained largely impassive, a chilling mask that betrayed little emotion. He calmly and repeatedly refuted any involvement in Emily Carter's disappearance. "I don't know anything about that," he would state, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. "I was home that night, just like I said before." When confronted with the irrefutable DNA evidence from Emily's red coat, he offered no explanation, no flicker of surprise or recognition. He merely acknowledged his DNA was in the system from a past minor arrest, a fact he seemed to present as an unfortunate coincidence rather than damning proof. Detective Mitchell, alongside experienced interrogators, pressed him relentlessly. They presented the eyewitness accounts of his distinctive truck being seen near Emily's house that night, the inexplicable scratches his former co-workers recalled seeing on his arms, and his disturbing, almost prophetic comment about people disappearing in the snow without a trace. Doyle met each line of questioning with a blank stare, a dismissive shrug, or a quiet, firm reiteration of his original, now thoroughly discredited alibi. His calm, almost detached refusal to engage or offer any alternative explanation was deeply unsettling, indicative of a man who had mastered the art of concealing dark secrets for a very long time. His practiced silence was a formidable defense, honed over 2 decades of unspoken guilt. The prosecution, spearheaded by the determined Assistant District Attorney Sarah Jensen, understood early on that a confession from Doyle, while highly desirable, might never materialize. Their strategy shifted from extraction to accumulation, focusing on building an ironclad circumstantial case that would leave no room for doubt in a jury's mind. The foundation of this case was the irrefutable DNA evidence, but to solidify it they needed more. A critical piece of the puzzle still remained in the physical world, Doyle's old pickup truck. Investigators knew that Doyle had owned and driven an older model, rust-speckled truck in 2001, a vehicle that had been a minor point of interest in the initial investigation due to several neighbor sightings. With the DNA evidence now directly implicating Doyle, Detective Mitchell ordered a new intensive search for this specific vehicle. The task was formidable. Locating a specific 2-decade-old vehicle, potentially long since sold, junked, or dismantled, was akin to finding a needle in a haystack spread across multiple states. However, police utilized their resources, painstakingly tracking down the vehicle's VIN, vehicle identification number, through old registration records, insurance claims, and state DMV databases. After weeks of diligent cross-state investigation, contacting countless junkyards, salvage operations, and scrap metal dealers across Michigan and its neighboring states, the truck was finally located. It had been sold for scrap years ago to a small rural junkyard several hours north of Kalamazoo, near the town of Traverse City. The vehicle, a relic of a bygone era, was found in a remote, overgrown corner of the yard, partially stripped of its usable parts, covered in years of grime, rust, and encroaching vegetation, almost indistinguishable from the other automotive skeletons surrounding it. It was a testament to the persistence of the cold case unit that they found it at all. The discovery was a tremendous, unexpected break. The truck was immediately secured, carefully documented, and then transported back to the state crime lab for another meticulous forensic examination, mirroring the intensity of the coat's analysis. Every inch of its interior was scrutinized with micro-precision. Forensic analysts painstakingly collected samples of carpeting, upholstery fibers from the seats, and even layers of accumulated dust from the cab. The efforts yielded a crucial and compelling finding: microscopic fibers, consistent in color, texture, and specific polymer composition, with the distinctive red wool blend of Emily Carter's winter coat, were discovered deeply embedded in the truck's passenger seat upholstery and footwell. These were not generic red fibers. They were a precise match. This was indisputable physical evidence directly linking Emily's physical presence to Doyle's vehicle, a powerful corroboration of the DNA found on her coat. The fibers indicated beyond a reasonable doubt that Emily had indeed been inside that truck. The scientific narrative was now undeniable. Raymond Doyle had physical contact with Emily, and she had been in his vehicle. With the irrefutable DNA evidence from the coat, the re-evaluated and now chillingly consistent witness testimonies, Doyle's unconvincing and contradictory initial statements, and now the critical corroborating fiber evidence from his truck, the prosecution possessed an overwhelming case. Assistant District Attorney Jensen and Detective Mitchell worked tirelessly, meticulously weaving these disparate threads into a compelling narrative that would resonate with a jury. They sought to reconstruct in exacting detail the agonizing final moments of February 12, 2001. According to the prosecution's reconstruction, presented with chilling precision, Raymond Doyle, known for his reclusive nature, but also his late-night drives, had been circulating in the Elm Street neighborhood on the night of Emily's disappearance. The re-evaluated neighbor sightings of his distinct truck, idling slowly around 9 p.m. and 9:30 p.m., confirmed his predatory presence. Doyle, a creature of habit and observation, likely knew Emily's routine as a nursing student, including her frequent borrowing of household items from Mrs. Vance and her early morning classes. He had observed Emily returning from Mrs. Vance's house, perhaps watching her through his own darkened window, or from his idling truck, parked subtly nearby on a side street. As Emily crossed her snow-covered backyard, just yards from the assumed safety of her back door, Doyle saw his opportunity. He approached her, likely under the pretense of offering a ride, perhaps suggesting he could drop her off at the university early for a study session, or some other seemingly innocuous neighborly offer designed to disarm her. Emily, a polite young woman accustomed to neighborly interactions in her quiet community, would have likely politely refused, as she was almost home. However, Doyle did not accept her refusal. The evidence suggested a rapid escalation. He likely grabbed her, forcefully attempting to compel her towards his waiting pickup truck. A violent struggle ensued, either in the backyard itself or as Doyle attempted to force her into the passenger side of the vehicle. The epithelial cells, found so heavily concentrated on the collar and inner sleeves of Emily's red coat, indicated that Doyle had forcefully grasped her by the neck, upper torso, and her arms, perhaps to subdue her, silence her, or physically pull her into his truck. During this terrifying struggle, Emily's distinctive red coat shed its fibers onto the truck's upholstery and carpet, leaving an invisible, irrefutable signature of her desperate presence there. Once inside the confines of the truck, the struggle likely continued, but Emily, a petite young woman against a grown man, was ultimately overwhelmed. The most agonizing aspect of the case for the Carter family, and indeed for the entire community, remained the ultimate fate of Emily Carter's body. Despite renewed extensive searches, employing advanced sonar technology in the vast, remote wooded areas, frozen lakes and wetlands surrounding Kalamazoo, locations that would have been virtually impossible to investigate thoroughly with the limited resources and technology available in 2001, no remains were ever found. The prosecution theorized that Doyle, having committed the abduction and likely murder, had then driven Emily's body to a secluded, perhaps frozen location, taking advantage of the deep snow, remote terrain, and the vast uninhabited wilderness to conceal it permanently. His chilling comment to his co-worker, made a week after Emily vanished, "It's easy for someone to disappear in the snow without leaving a trace," now sounded less like a casual observation and more like a dark, perverse boast, a veiled confession cloaked in casual conversation. The lack of a body while presenting a challenge was ultimately overcome by the sheer weight of other evidence. Raymond Doyle was charged with first-degree murder. The trial, held in 2022, drew intense local and national media attention, a grim spotlight on a small town's long unresolved tragedy. Linda Carter, now 68, a woman whose face was etched with the indelible lines of 2 decades of pain and tireless searching, sat in the front row of the courtroom every single day. Her gaze was firm, unwavering, fixed on the man accused of taking her daughter. The prosecution systematically presented its case, laying out the compelling mosaic of evidence, the irrefutable DNA match, the corroborating fiber evidence, the re-evaluated and now chillingly consistent eyewitness accounts, and the inconsistencies in Doyle's original police statements, contrasted with his suspicious behavior and comments. Doyle's defense attempted to cast doubt on the DNA, suggesting cross-contamination in the lab, and on the old neighbor testimonies, attributing them to faded memories or misinterpretation. However, the meticulous presentation of the scientific evidence, coupled with the sheer volume of corroborating details, proved insurmountable. Each piece of evidence, individually powerful, became devastating when viewed as part of the larger, cohesive narrative. After days of emotionally charged testimony, legal arguments, and careful deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. The courtroom was hushed, every breath held. The foreman's voice, clear and resonant, pronounced Raymond Doyle guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted in a collective gasp, followed immediately by the muffled sobs of the Carter family. Linda Carter, after 21 years of relentless, agonizing struggle, finally heard the words that offered a measure of justice for her beloved daughter. Tears streamed down her face, a complex mixture of profound sorrow for Emily's lost life and a weary, bone-deep relief that the man responsible would finally be held accountable. In 2022, more than 21 years after Emily Carter vanished from her Kalamazoo backyard, Raymond Doyle, then 66, was formally sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judgment brought a painful, yet profoundly necessary closure to the Carter family. They finally had an answer, however devastating. Emily had not simply disappeared. She had been the victim of a depraved predator who had lived among them for decades, hidden behind the mask of an ordinary, reclusive existence. The verdict served as a bitter confirmation of Linda's steadfast, unwavering belief. Emily was taken, not lost. For the small city of Kalamazoo, the resolution of Emily Carter's case was far more than just a matter of justice served in a courtroom. It was a profound and deeply unsettling reckoning, marking the definitive end of a collective innocence. The town, which had always prided itself on its quiet, untouched nature, its sense of community safety, was forced to confront the chilling realization that for 2 long decades, it had unknowingly shared its streets, its shops, its very air with a cold-blooded murderer who had moved silently, unseen, just next door. The case shattered the illusion of small-town imperviousness to violence, leaving an indelible scar on the community's psyche. It was a stark reminder that evil could reside anywhere, even in the most seemingly idyllic settings. Today, when the cold wind sweeps through the snow-covered streets of Kalamazoo, particularly in the depths of winter, many still remember Emily Carter's vibrant red coat. It remains a powerful, almost ghostly symbol, the last visible piece of a young life brutally torn away, an image forever burned into the town's collective memory. And paradoxically, it was that same coat, seemingly silent for so long, that ultimately became the undeniable key. The truth, after so many years of being buried under layers of snow, silence, and unanswered questions, could not, in the end, be forever hidden. Emily Carter's story stands as a testament to the enduring power of a mother's love, the relentless march of scientific progress, and the haunting reality that even in the quietest towns, darkness can reside just next door, awaiting its moment to strike. The relentless grip of winter, which once swallowed Emily Carter whole, eventually gave way to the tenacious march of time, and with it, the cold clarity of scientific truth. For 21 years, the town of Kalamazoo harbored a silent shadow, a predator hidden in plain sight while a mother's unwavering love refused to let the memory of her daughter fade. It was the resilience of that love, coupled with the profound advancements in forensic science, that finally pierced the veil of silence. Raymond Doyle, a man who believed the snow could bury all traces of his monstrous act, was ultimately undone by a few microscopic cells, an invisible whisper on a crimson coat. His conviction, decades delayed, brought a painful yet undeniable closure, not just to a grieving family, but to a community haunted by the specter of an unanswered question. Emily Carter's story stands as a stark testament to the enduring human capacity for both cruelty and perseverance. It reminds us that even in the quietest corners of the world, darkness can linger, subtle and insidious, awaiting its moment to strike. Yet it also speaks to the unwavering power of a mother's resolve, the relentless pursuit of justice, and the truth's ultimate inescapable ability to surface, even from beneath the deepest snows of time. This case redefined the perception of safety in Kalamazoo, shattering an illusion of small-town imperviousness, leaving a permanent reminder that trust, once broken, can never be fully restored. What are your thoughts on how the community of Kalamazoo might begin to heal after such a prolonged and unsettling revelation? Share your perspectives in the comments below. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to After the Silence for more true crime stories that dig deep into the mysteries of the past.